This one's not necessarily as smoky as the other one is.
Here comes my favorite part.
Alright guys, on today's video, I'm going to show you what it's like to own a boat with old mechanical diesels. And specifically, I've got a 2000 Pursuit 3400 right here with twin Volvo TAMD 63 high performance engines. I know that sounds like a lot, but they're literally just an old couple construction engines that Volvo used to put in commercial equipment, excavators, trucks, whatever it might be. So on today's video, let's walk through and give you the full experience of what it's like to own a boat with old mechanical diesels. All right, here we go. They're a little loud, especially when the hatch is open, and also they're smoky. Another thing, turbos are loud. And it really doesn't level out until after you get on plane and at cruising speed, because you're putting the engines under so much load. Keep getting louder. So we level out. But no matter what, you're going to get turbo noise with these old mechanical turbo diesels. Some things to look for with these old mechanical diesels. For starters, I don't think a lot of people realize these things will literally run, and for most cases are built to run for 10,000 hours. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but in the tractor world, we build engines to run for 10,000 hours. On the on-road high-rate truck world, 10,000 hour motors are not something that is rare by any means. I mean, you see trucks with millions of miles, but what's most important about those diesels is the hours on the engines. Now, when it comes to outboard boats these days, inboard gas boats, you'd be lucky to get you know, 1,500, 2,000 hours, as long as you maintain a boat well. I know some people are getting more than that, but I'm just saying for examples here. These engines have 1,350 hours on them, and they are just at the beginning of their life. And I say that cautiously because these are 25-year-old diesels, and they were put in this boat back in late 1999, and they have never come out of this boat ever. And for the most part, from what I understand, they fired up and run and drive and have been very reliable their entire lives. Now, let's just generalize mechanical diesel engines for a second. I know some guys love their Cummins, some guys love their Caterpillars. Volvo Penta has been a very sought after diesel for recreational boating throughout the years. But generalizing mechanical diesels, I'd like to start with the fuel systems. So on these boats, when I call them mechanical diesels, what I'm referring to is they use an old gear-driven P pump with individual injection ports off of the pump that then feed low pressure fuel. Well, I say slightly higher pressure fuel. Low pressure fuel goes into the pump. Slightly higher pressure fuel comes out of these individual metal fuel lines and then goes to each individual injector on the diesel. In this specific case, this is a 5.5 liter inline 6 turbo diesel. So we have 6 injectors, 6 ports off the P pump. I'm comparing this to the modern common rail diesel engines, which have a fuel pump. It's called a high pressure fuel pump. That pump pressurizes an individual fuel rail, which will build, you know, in modern diesels, you know, 26 to 30,000 plus PSI in that rail. And then each individual injector is fed via solenoids from that rail to high pressure fuel. And then the solenoids via electronic control, or an ECU, trigger each of those injectors to fire. Whereas these mechanical systems, that injection pump is what is timing or laying out the firing order in which those injectors fire. So call this a dumb version of mechanical or diesel technology, whereas the new high pressure common rail systems are the smart version, where you have an ECU controlling the injection timing and timing rates. And I mean, some of these new injectors are firing, you know, 20, 30, 60 times a second, especially the piezoelectric, not the solenoid, but piezoelectric injectors. Anyway, I'm going a little bit too far into diesel fuel technology. Let's get back to mechanicals though. That's why I'm calling these mechanical diesels, is because we have a mechanical fuel injection system. So it's been around for a long time. It's fairly reliable. Parts are plentiful. These are very common injection pumps. You can buy them on the internet, no problem. And then typically these injectors are fairly common as well. So this old tech is good tech. However, it's not as efficient as the newer diesels with the high pressure common rail. And when guys refer to a diesel as smoky or puts out black smoke out the exhaust, typically in the older diesels, what they're referring to is these old mechanical injection systems. Just because of the way they are, this pump varies its injection rate based on RPM, or throttle position. So as I increase the throttle, it's going to increase the fuel to the injection pump and then increase the fuel to my injectors, which will then increase the RPM, increase the power, increase the overall speed of the engine, which then produces horsepower. Diesels are simple. They literally typically have an air intake, no throttle valve, and then a fuel pump. You give it more fuel, it sucks in more air, and it spins faster and produces more power. In this case, we've got a turbo assist on this engine, so a turbocharged diesel in this case, which helps get rid of the negative intake air pressure and gives you positive intake air pressure, which then helps put more oxygen or air into the engine and produces more power, but also burns more fuel. Either way, turbocharged diesels, very common, as you all probably know already. But when you refer to old smoky diesels, mechanical diesels are typically the culprit. So because of the old mechanical injection system, you can sit there, you can turn a screw up, you can give it a ton of fuel, and it can only suck as much air as it can, but it's going to give it as much fuel as it possibly can. So black smoke is typically unburnt fuel, because these are less efficient than the new high pressure common rail diesels, which are controlled by an ECU. They're typically more smoky, and smoke can cause smoke can be the culprit for a lot of issues with your engine, but traditionally these are just going to be more smoky than a high pressure common rail diesel. Well, this may not necessarily be a diesel thing, but what else can you expect from an old mechanical diesel? Well, like I said earlier, they're noisy, they're clattery, their valves make a lot of noise, pistons make a lot of noise. Piston technology, valve train technology has come a long way in the last 20 years with gasoline engines, with diesel engines, everything. So when you get a new diesel, it's typically going to be quieter, just audibly, the old diesel clattering, you know, than these old mechanical diesels. Why? Well, like I just said, the technology in the valve train and the pistons, connecting rods, crankshaft, all of that has improved over the years, where the diesel itself has become quieter. A lot of that has added to efficiency of the engine, its ability to produce power, heat management, you name it. It's a lot of things. But these old mechanical diesels, you know, this engine has coned pistons, which helps with combustion for a diesel. There's a, you know, a star spray pattern that comes out of these injectors. But just in general, you know, these Volvos have a specific, very distinct diesel clatter. You know, a Cummins clatters a little bit differently than the Volvos do. The Caterpillars clatter a little bit differently than the Cummins do. Same with the John Deeres. You know, they all have their own unique sound, which, again, guys begin to speculate and say, oh, I only love these engines because of the, you know, the power they make, the sound they make, whatever it might be. It's kind of cool. It's a fun little diesel, I guess, quirk that guys appreciate. I definitely appreciate. And, you know, a guy will hear a boat or a truck roll up and be like, oh man, there must be a Caterpillar in that truck. And it's like, and the common person's like, well, how do you know? Well, the turbo noise, the clatter of the diesel, the sound the exhaust note makes when you rev it up. All things, just like a gasoline car, you can tell via diesel. Now, let's get back to these specific Volvo TAMD 63s. So, these specific diesels are unique. Volvo designed these. They put them in marine use, but they've also actually been used in some construction and commercial use as well. This specific engine, if you see, has split cylinder heads. So I got 3 banks here and 3 banks here. This actually can be a 3-cylinder engine as well, which is pretty unique, but it also makes this engine easier to work on and maintain if needed. So if I needed to pull off one section of cylinder heads because I just need to get to this piston here, I'm not removing a whole head. I'm just removing one section of the cylinder head. A lot of big mechanical diesels, a lot of big new diesels are built that way, where you can just rebuild one cylinder at a time. Really appreciate it on these Volvos. They do the same thing. They also have a larger version of this TAMD. I think there's 72s maybe. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe there's 74s. And then there's smaller versions, of course, too. Volvo has taken this engine and this block, and they have gone through many generations. So I believe the new like Volvo D6 is based on this original engine architecture. So the new Volvo D6, you know, is making 400, 500 and something horsepower, whereas these diesels are making 370. You know, it's probably down just a little bit because of their age. But same block architecture, new cylinder head, new fuel system, high pressure common rail, new turbo. They're throwing superchargers and turbos on them these days in some cases. So pretty unique, but Volvo has gone a long way in developing their range of marine diesel engines. And for, you know, 60 feet and under, Volvo has become, you know, one of the main marine diesels that is used out there for recreational boats. All right, what's the next thing with these old mechanical diesels? Well, we've got this seemingly small displacement 5.5 liter inline six with a pretty beefy turbocharger. You know, and this is a single speed, it's not a variable geometry, oil fed from the engine, and then just a single air intake. We get air sucked in here, it goes through our compressor, the turbine's getting exhaust air from the exhaust, spins the turbine up, which spins the compressor up, the compressor builds boost, and then pushes boost into our intercooler, which then goes into, you know, individual cylinders and gives it positive pressure, cool air, and that's what makes your power. And then all your turbine exhaust air goes out a big old, you know, this is like a 5-inch exhaust out the back where our water dumps into as well from the engine that cools the engine, and then it spits exhaust and water out the back of the boat. Pretty simple. These mechanical diesels run coolant, so antifreeze in the blocks, and then they have these heat exchangers. So here's my intercooler here, and then I have, you know, various heat exchangers. You know, like this whole reservoir that says Volvo on it is actually what holds my coolant. So raw water passes through little pipes inside this heat exchanger, cools the coolant, and then that coolant circulates through the block, and the raw water gets kicked back out of the engine through the exhaust. So no matter what, these engines are only ever running coolant through them, which is actually really good for the longevity of the engine as well. We know that in many cases, raw salty water can really hurt an engine and corrode and just create bad problems. When you're on freshwater lakes, you know, it's not as bad, but being able to run coolant, antifreeze through engine blocks in salty environments is very important. Another interesting thing about mechanical diesels, well, they, in all retrospect, don't have a lot of safeties. You know, once you supply fuel to these things, they're gonna run, and they're not gonna turn off until you shut fuel off. So on these engines, these old mechanical pumps have an electronic solenoid on it, and when you turn your key switch on, a solenoid opens up, and then when you turn your key and starter fires, it's going to allow fuel to pass through and start the engine up. It will not turn off until, literally, there's a lever on here. You pull this lever back, which my key actually has, it shuts that solenoid off and then kills the fuel supply to the pump, which then shuts the engine down. On the new diesels, that's all done with the ECU. So the ECU turns on, it says, hey, injectors, you can fire now. Starter fires up, high pressure fuel pump spins, pressurizes the fuel pressure rail, and then fuel injectors fire. When you shut off a new diesel, the injectors actually just kill power to themselves, and that's what shuts the engine off. So, pretty unique. However, these old mechanicals are known for running away, which is where the fail-safe to shut them off fails. They end up sucking in air as fast as they can, and it just dumps as much fuel as it possibly can into the engine until it blows up. If you look at like tractor pulls and stuff like that, a lot of those guys actually run what they call guillotines on the end of their turbo. And what that'll do is if the diesel accidentally runs away and gets a little too happy, that guillotine goes down right in front of the turbo, shuts off the air supply, and then i.e. shuts off the engine. Luckily for me, and as you guys just saw on this engine not too long ago, I had a problem where an oil feed line for my oil filter was cut, dumped oil, lost oil pressure, and the thing actually shut down because it had a oil pressure fail-safe solenoid on it. So when it sensed, where's the doohickey? I think the oil pressure sensor somewhere here. I got my coolant temp sensors over here. Oil pressure is oil pressure is right here. So anyway, it sensed low oil pressure, send a signal to cut fuel to the engine, and the engine shut down. So thankfully there are some old fail-safes on these diesels, but if you go back into the old tractor world, I mean, those guys literally have a mechanical cable that pulls the lever on the old mechanical fuel pump, which shuts fuel down, basically closes a valve, shuts fuel down to the fuel pump. I mean, some of them are that simple. But in this case, thankfully, I do have some electronic fail-safes that keep me from blowing up an engine on accident. Mind you, a little noisy. These Volvos have a very distinct sound. And it's less of valve knock or clatter, and it's more of this like low. It's kind of satisfying, but it's unique in this aspect because it's this like knocky lope sound. But if we open up one of the valve trains, I mean, you can see this engine's only spinning over at 550 RPM right now. Nothing is in too much of a hurry. Not spinning over very fast, but just a very unique whoa, 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 whoa. There you go. There's your smoke. You know, these engines probably could be a little less smoky. I need to clean my aftercoolers. That'll probably, and intercoolers, and that'll probably help with some of that smoke. But this stuff is, these are literally, you know, particles in the air, and they get attached to or stuck on your transom and paint, and that's what causes the soot that you see. And the same thing, you know, this one's not necessarily as smoky as the other one is. It all depends on the injection, the injector rates, the amount of fuel at idle, and also how clogged up the intercoolers or aftercoolers might be. And again, I need to service both of those this winter. That is a must. The next thing about old mechanical diesels is that if you're not going very fast and don't have a whole lot of wind, you can smell them. So all that soot and exhaust, unburnt fuel, kind of wafts back up into your face or to whoever's sitting back there. And as some would say, it gets a little stinky. But other people appreciate that smell, like me. This one's just a bit of a personal preference, but I like my idle RPM right at about 600. The engine's really smooth out. They sip fuel. Sitting in a nice 60, 70 oil pressure. And again, idling and then underway, I mean, we're at about 160 degrees no matter what. So we're still creeping up to temperature right now. But they like running cool, and they like their oil pressure. Sometimes after you've been running for a while, this oil pressure will dip down to like 30 or 40. That's okay. But when they're cruising, 80 pounds all day long. Once you crank them up a bit, you know, 1,000 RPM, just sounds like you're sitting on top of a couple school buses or, you know, old pieces of construction equipment. Which, you know, you try to sound deaden as much as you can. But when you open up the hatch, sound deaden. See, quite a big difference. They're loud, so I mean there's like 3 inches of material between us and those engines right now, but even that, it's still super loud. Are loud. And it really doesn't level out until after you get on plane and at cruising speed, because you're putting the engines under so much load. Keep getting louder. So we level out, but no matter what, you're going to get turbo noise with these old mechanical turbo diesels. Grip's pretty good though at 2300. Going about 28 miles an hour, but feels solid, comfortable. I think the only solution is just install more speakers or a better amp or more sound deadening material. Any would work. Engine's healthy, thank God. Makes me very happy. And now just wait for it. Here comes my favorite part. There's nothing like that. Both of them coming off plane in unison, the turbos cutting out. And then we're just back to putzing right along. Yeah, this makes me happy. And the exhausts are under the water. Not too bad. And even when you're back here, you know, back in the back of the boat, it's not bad at all either. I have a bit of a list right now because my holding tank is plumb full. Well, there you have it. That is what you need to know about owning a mechanical diesel. I'm sure there's a million other things that I could have possibly told you, so leave it down in the comments if you have a question or have another concern about your mechanical diesel, your common rail diesel, whatever it might be. Let me know. Happy to make more content about this stuff too. Specifically, if you're looking for Volvo TAMD 63 content, I'll put it out there. But anyway, thank you guys for watching as always. This is Boat Restoration by Ben. See ya!